Buenos días, mi nombre es Héctor Rebozo, soy director de sistemas de Binter y profesor asociado del máster de Ciberseguridad e Inteligencia de Datos de la Universidad de La Laguna. En el marco de la Cátedra Institucional en Ciberseguridad Binter ULL, que como es conocido tiene por objeto promover y fomentar la formación, la divulgación y la investigación sobre ciberseguridad, tengo la enorme satisfacción de presentar hoy el tercer seminario del ciclo de conferencias de Ciberseguridad 2020-2021, en el que contaremos con la presencia de Thomar Wepner, Corporate Security Officer de Amadeus, que nos va a explicar el enfoque sobre ciberseguridad que desarrolla una gran compañía de software como es Amadeus. Desde la perspectiva de un gran proveedor multinacional de servicios tecnológicos del sector travel, vamos a obtener una visión de las principales amenazas y retos a los que nos enfrentamos y de la estrategia desarrollada en Amadeus para gestionar la ciberseguridad, abordando los tres pilares en los que se fundamenta, como son la tecnología, los procesos y sobre todo las personas. Quiero agradecer en nombre de Binter y de la Universidad de La Laguna la magnífica predisposición y generosidad de Tomás y también a Diego Bianconi de Amadeus, dándonos la oportunidad de contar con una visión de la ciberseguridad desde una gran compañía de servicios tecnológicos, que seguro va a ser de mucho interés para todos los estudiantes del máster y toda la comunidad profesional y universitaria relacionada con las tecnologías de la información. Después de la presentación tendremos la oportunidad de contar con la presencia online de Tomás y podremos plantearle preguntas en directo, aproximadamente media hora, por lo que les animo a aprovechar la ocasión para profundizar en aquellas cuestiones de su interés. Muchas gracias a todos por su asistencia y espero que les guste el seminario de hoy.
Hello and welcome to my little presentation on cybersecurity at Amadeus. My name is Thomas Wepner and I am a corporate security officer at Amadeus. My responsibility is for people security. That means everything that has to do with security awareness, training, communication, and a couple of other human-related topics in security. I have joined the security organization in 2013 when the whole organization was rebuilt, and I was running a program called SHIELD for the first 5 years. This program is still running, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later in this presentation. Before we start, I would like to thank Hector very much to invite me to and to give me the opportunity to speak to you. Now, one of the peculiarities of security is that we usually deal with a lot of really sensitive and confidential information. So that means I cannot share, any details of what we do or, the tools we use. But I can talk to you about the methodology and a little bit about our history, how we evolved the security organization and our security maturity. So that's what I'll do over the next hour. And this here is our agenda. So I want to start with a quick overview of what Amadeus actually is, in case you don't know. And then we'll follow with a look at the threats. What are the threats to our industry and to us in particular, followed by a look at some of the security challenges that we have in particular. Then we will look at how we build our strategy, so a little look back in history and how we developed the strategy for today, and then also we will have a look at how we actually implemented this strategy. And I'll talk about some of the key factors that I think are most important in doing this. And then finally we will close with a look in my special subject, which is how we deal with humans. How do we make our humans more secure? All right, that was the agenda. So let's start with the first point, and that is who we are as Amadeus. I want to show you quickly what we do and how we do it. So we are a technology company that is dedicated to the global travel industry. We offer cutting-edge technology solutions to everyone involved in the travel ecosystem. And we do that on a truly global scale. In 2019, for example, we have processed more than 646 million bookings, and together with our partner Navitaire, we boarded more than 1.9 billion passengers. Now, we design our solutions not only around our customers' needs, but also around their customers' needs, which are the travelers, the end customers. Right from the first moment of a trip, when people search for inspiration, through to the shopping experience, the booking, and then pre-trip, on-trip, and post-trip, we offer solutions to improve the customer's travel experience along the way. Now, our customers cover the entire global travel ecosystem. We have, of course, travel agencies, both online and offline, focused on leisure travel and on business travel. And we also have travel agencies in corporations. Then, of course, we have airlines, airports, ground handlers, hotels, cars, tours. Really, I mean, everything, even insurance, travel insurance providers are part of our portfolio. So we cover the entire ecosystem truly, and we do that around the world. We are present. We have offices in more than 100 countries, and our market coverage extends to more than 190 countries, which I believe is even more than members of the United Nations. And we do all that with a very diverse and dedicated team. And today we have around 17,000 employees and a couple of thousand external staff members. They come from more than 150 different nations, and they speak 62 different languages. Of course, English is the one common language that we all speak, but you can imagine that how should I say, that the quality is not always the same, which is another thing we need to take into account in security, and specifically in awareness. So I think that's enough for a quick introduction to our company and what we do. So let's look at the threats that we have in our industry. Now, our business is organizing travels, and in order to do that, you need a lot of personal information. Just think about things like you need the names, you need addresses, you need birthdays, you need passport information, for example, and of course you need payment information like credit cards or other forms of payment. All this information is very valuable for cyber criminals, as you can imagine. They can either turn this information into money right away, or they can use it to attack people further down the road. And in addition to that, the information we have is very useful for another very specific kind of people. Just think, what James Bond would be able to do if he knew exactly at which day Mr. Blofeld would travel, and on which seat in the airplane he would sit, and in which hotel he would stay. That would be pretty interesting information for Mr. Bond, don't you think? So the very nature of our business makes us an interesting target for all kinds of bad guys. The biggest threats that we see today are DOS attacks, denial of service attacks, of course, that would bring our systems down and cut off customers or airlines or whatever from running bookings and reservations and check-in, for example. Ransomware is a huge threat to us and to any business on the planet nowadays. And of course, data breaches, people stealing personal information would be a big threat to us. So now let's see how we protect ourselves from all of this. And I want to talk about a couple of specific challenges when we start. And the first one is that we see an increasing level of professionalization, let's call it that. we see that people are getting better and better, and they have actually started selling hacking as a service, if you will, on the darknet. You can buy ransomware attacks, you can buy DOS attacks, so even people that have no IT background, that are just pure criminals, can use services of bad guys to attack companies or people. And another challenge is, particular for us, is our legacy systems. You know that Amadeus was built in the 80s of the last century. This sounds terrible now that I say it. I mean, we're only about 30 years old, but 30 years in IT is a long time. And of course, we have changed over those 30 years. We have moved away from pure mainframe to server-based architectures. We're moving into the cloud, but we still have some legacy systems around, and they pose a particularly big challenge, of course, because the legacy systems never had security in mind as one of their top priorities. So it takes big efforts to protect those systems, and of course we try to get rid of them as fast as we can. Then I just mentioned cloud, so changing business requirements, of course, are a challenge for us, and the cloud is one of the big challenges today. Everyone is moving into the cloud, so are we. It has a lot of advantages to do that. But of course, that creates new security risks. You can't just assume that by moving into the cloud, suddenly you don't need to worry about security anymore. It's not the case. So this is another challenge that we need to think about. Then DevOps, a new concept of running operations. In the past, one of the founding principles of IT security was segregation of duty. It was clear that developers should not have access to production systems because it would enable them to do fraud much easier. If you write the code yourself and you compile it and then you operate it afterwards, it's not so difficult to hide some backdoors or other things. But now, with DevOps, we actually want developers to access our production systems, and it makes sense because who knows better how those systems work than the people that develop them? So there is a lot of merit in doing this, but of course it opens up some security holes that we need to take care of. We need to build new processes and monitoring capabilities to make sure that the developers can't do any bad things. Then people skills is a huge challenge for us, and everybody else. You see that over the last years, security has become so important, and I'm sure it will stay this important. This is not going to change. So we need people with the right skill sets, and they are hard to find. It's good to have skills that you have learned, but it's also great to have some experience. And at the moment, it's really, really difficult to find those people. Awareness is, of course, a problem, or not a problem, a challenge, as we call it. That's the challenge I'm taking care of, and you can remember, you can see that with 17,000 people scattered around the globe, it's not so easy to bring them all up to the same level of awareness. Then, of course, we have the final challenge, and this is the biggest challenge for every project, every department in every company has the budget challenge. You have to, we're running businesses. Businesses are there to make money, so we have to try and keep our costs down, and we have to find the right balance between, spending and risk. And we'll talk a little more about that when we look at how we manage risk. So let's move on to the next chapter, which is a little bit of history about how we build our strategy. When we started the new CISO organization in 2013, we didn't really have time initially to build a big, nice strategy. You know, initially we had to build a new organization. We had to consolidate everything that we had across the company in security and get a clear picture of our security maturity. Once we had that, we could really start thinking about a new strategy. And this is how we build our strategic plan. So we have some drivers for cybersecurity, 3 of them, and I'll go through them one by one. The first one are the external drivers. So we have, for example, the top risks that threaten our business continuity. For example, DOS attacks, that would be one of those top risks. And then we have regulatory requirements. You've all heard about GDPR and other laws and regulations that we have to comply with. And the third one, talking about compliance, are other compliance requirements. This means, for example, being compliant with the credit card security standard, the PCI standard, which is extremely important for us because we deal with a lot of payment information. And if we would lose our PCI certification, we would not be able to use those credit cards anymore. And you can imagine what that would mean for a company or a business like ours. Then we have internal drivers, and the internal drivers, of course, are the strategic objectives of the company. You know, this is one of the main things that people often forget in security, is that really, I mean, we are running a business and we have to be in line with business objectives. Security is not a standalone thing. It has to be always aligned with the business. So taking business objectives into account and including them in our strategic direction is very important. And then we have to think about our risk appetite. I'll talk a little bit more about how we assess risks and how we make decisions about that later on. But basically what this means is that the company has to decide, looking at the business value on the one side and the risks on the other side, and then make a decision, how much risk am I willing to take for my business. You cannot run any business without taking risks. That's just impossible. But you have to find the right balance. And that, by the way, is not only true for cybersecurity risk, it's true for any risk that a company is facing. And then finally, we have the functional drivers. And one of this, of course, is our current security maturity. There might be things in your maturity that maybe they don't pose the greatest risk, but they still need to be fixed, like basics in security. So we have to look at our maturity and also if we find big gaps there, then we need to also include that in our strategy. And finally, we have the functional strengths and weaknesses. This could be, for example, functional strengths or weaknesses in our products that we might have to consider in our strategy. So you see, it's not just looking at your IT and then deriving a strategy from that. It's a much, much bigger picture that you need to look at when you think about your cybersecurity strategy. Now, I want to tell you another a story about something that we did a couple of years ago where we made a significant change to our strategy. So let me go back in time a little bit to explain why. And if you think about security in the past, especially when you think back to the 80s when we started, at that time companies usually had one data center, big data center. You had private links to your providers and to your customers, and there was no such thing as the internet that came much later. So it was basically, security was like building a castle. We put our treasure, confidential information in the middle, and then we build a big fat wall of resilience around that. This wall of resilience would be antivirus systems, firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and so on, including physical security, of course. And we would build this wall and protect us from the outside. and feel safe inside our castle. But then, with the advent of new technologies, and particularly with the advent of the internet, all of that changed. First of all, we started having multiple centers. You could network them much easier than in the past. And then more and more things went onto the internet, of course. We don't have customers connected with private links anymore, or very, very few. Almost everything is running over the internet today. And of course, doing this has created new challenges. And we know, or we have to take into account, that there are people out there who are constantly pounding against our wall of resilience. They will keep pushing it and beating in it until they punch a little hole in it. And when that happens, they get inside. Now, once they are inside, they will, move around in the network. They will try and find the treasure. And if they do, they find it, they will take it. And if you detect them after the fact, then it's too late. Your treasure will be gone, and it will be unrecoverable in 99.9% of the cases. So what we need to do is we need to actually move this little red ball over to the left as close as possible to our wall of resilience. That means we need to detect people as soon as they make it inside. We need to detect them. And if we can do that, and if we can start our response right there, then we can cut them off before they can do any real harm. And what that meant for our strategy was that we had to put a lot of focus and investments and resources into our detection capabilities. So not just protecting from the outside, but also protecting the inside, and make sure that whenever somebody makes it through our wall of resilience, that we can detect them and kick them back out. That's the kind of game we play today. They make it inside, boom, we kick them back out. And they come again, and we kick them back out. So this was the new strategy that we developed a couple of years ago, and we put a lot of effort into our Security Operations Center. And again, I'll talk more about that in a minute or so. Now, let's look at how we have actually implemented our strategy. And that's not just what we did in the past. This is still the way we work. This is still our methodology. And before we start that, I want to highlight another thing here that I also do in trainings. A lot of people mistake information security for pure IT security. They think it's a technical problem and it can be solved with technology alone, and that's not true. Information security actually needs to look at three different areas. One of them, of course, is technology, but the other is processes and people. And I want to use a little analogy here to explain how these three work together. Now, when you think of traffic, that's my analogy. When you think of your cars today, you have airbags, you have all kinds of little electronic helpers to keep you on the right track and to help you brake if there's an emergency and so on. And we have computerized traffic systems, traffic flow systems and so on. All of that is there, all this technology is there to keep you and the people around you safe on the road. And of course we have something similar in our world, and that is IT security and physical security. So all those systems, those technical systems like firewalls and antivirus systems, etc., that help us keep our information safe and secure. Now, in traffic, we also have rules. We decide we want to drive on the left side. If there's a red light, you stop, and so on. All of those rules are written down in the traffic laws, and people have to abide to the law to keep them safe on the road. Otherwise, there would be pretty much chaos, and the chance for accidents would be much higher. Now, we have something similar in our world, in security, and it's called the security policies. That is, the framework that we have to tell people this is what you're allowed to do and this is what you're not allowed to do. Very important documents, actually. And then finally, we have the people. And if you imagine if you have the finest cars and a good traffic law, but if people don't know how to use them or how to apply them, then they would be pretty worthless. So that's why we send people to driving school before we let them drive on their own in the streets, again, to keep everyone on the street safe and secure. And we do something similar with security awareness. We have to make people aware of the technology that is at their hands, how to use it, but also we need to make them aware of the policies that we have in our company, and the guidelines for what is allowed and what's not allowed. So again, it's a bigger picture. It's not just IT. And now in security, working in security, we sometimes feel like we are walking on a tightrope. So let me take you on our side for a moment, and I want you to look at the world through the eyes of a security officer, just for a couple of minutes, and then you can go back to your own role again. So when I say we walk on a tightrope, we actually walk on a tightrope not between two poles, we walk between three poles. And the first one is the people, the users, our end users, our colleagues working in the company. And what do they want? Well, they want everything to be easy. They don't want to put a lot of effort into things. They want to have it easy to understand, easy to use. And that's fine, that's just human. That's something we have to consider when we build and design security solutions. They have to work for the people. If they don't, what will they do? They will find a way around us. They always do, and they always will. So that's the first thing we have to keep in mind, the user and his capabilities. Then we have the finance department. I mentioned the budget already earlier. So of course we are a company and we have to make money. We have to make a profit. So that means we have to keep cost at a feasible level. So that's the second pole, finances. And then we have the third one, and that is our own people, the experts, the security experts who know exactly how to build a secure solution. They know what would be best, the strongest rules, the strongest technology, and so on. Now we move between these three poles, and I'll give you an example of what this means in real life. Let's just think about a security, a password, for example. Let's think about our password policy. Let's say tomorrow we, from the corporate security office, make a new policy and we say from now on all passwords in the company have to be just 4-digit numbers, and you can just keep it. Wow, would the end user say, great, finally I don't have to remember all these different passwords anymore, and this is great, I love it. The finance department would say, well, how much will that cost? And we will say, well, it costs nothing really, it's changing configurations and that's it. So the finance department is happy. But could you imagine our colleagues in the security office? They would not go for this. They would call us crazy. So that wouldn't really work. Let's say, okay, we look for an alternative. We look for the complete opposite. We say, okay, let's make all passwords 15 characters long, and you have to use uppercase, lowercase, numbers, special characters, and you have to change your password every 2 weeks. Well, the security guys would say, okay, those are pretty good passwords. That would help us on the password side. Finance, again, they wouldn't really care because it doesn't cost much. But the users, they would call us crazy this time. They would say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to write down my password everywhere I can. Maybe I'll tattoo it on my forearm. But they will not go for this. They will find ways around this. So again, not a good solution. And let's look at a third alternative. Why don't we use technology to do this? We could just introduce, a system where we use a card with a chip on it, people have to remember just a 4-pin password for the pin and for the card, and that's it. Great solution. Security people love it. The users would love it. But now finance would say, hang on a second, how much would this cost? And then we start, okay, the initial solution, that many millions, then you need the cards, you need to replace them, you need maintenance, you need people to work on this. So you end up with a pretty strong bill to implement something like this. And that, again, might be a problem. So that is our reality in security. This is the challenge that we have to live with is, have something that works for the users, that is really secure, and doesn't cost too much. Okay, this is our life. And now we can all go back to our own lives and our own roles. And now I want to talk a little bit about our organization. Remember, we started building a new organization in 2013. At that time, we had just a couple of security officers, all in different organizations. There was no CISO at the time, for security. They were all working on their own in their own business unit. So since then, we have grown our organization tremendously. Today, we have more than 200 fully dedicated security people in our company. And we have more than 120 so-called white hats, people that get special training for secure development, and then they help their team members to create good, solid, secure products. Now we have, let me start in the middle here on this picture. We have 4 different security offices in our company now. The first one on the left is for office applications, so they take care of everything that we need in the office, like Office 365, Windows, SAP, etc. All those tools we use internally, and the underlying infrastructure to run those tools. Then we have the second security office, which takes care of the R&D population. So everything that our developers need in terms of software tools and infrastructure, test systems, etc., that is taken care of by this security office. And then we have a security office dedicated to our production. So they take care of our products, running on our production systems, on operations, and all the underlying productive infrastructure, servers, networks, etc. And finally, the latest addition, we have a security office in each of our business units. In our organization, we have a business unit for airline customers, we have one for travel agencies, and so on. And each of those business units has their own security office, and they take care of customer-specific security questions, issues, etc. And on top of all that, we have the corporate security office, which has a governing function. Corporate security office gives the corporate policies and guidelines, and its job is to control that the company actually follows those policies and guidelines. And then at the bottom, we have the Security Operations Center. This is the important group of people that manages or monitors all our systems to make sure that we can detect intruders very, very quickly. I'll talk a little bit more about them later. Then we have some regional security officers in the Americas, in the Europe, Middle East, and Africa region, and in Asia Pacific region. They take care of region-specific security issues, and again, they work with customers, but also they work with regulators, etc., in the markets. Now, when you want to implement security in a large company, you need a framework. You need something to help you, to guide you to do that. And we have looked at various frameworks like COBIT, like NIST, and an ISO 27000, and eventually we have decided to go with ISO 27001 because we regard it as a truly global standard and best practice today. So we have implemented an ISMS, an Information Security Management System, based on ISO 27001, and we are certified. We have been certified for a number of years now on various levels in the company. The first certification was for our production systems only, and then we have extended that to corporate layer and so on. So this is a big advantage for us today because this is really a mandatory requirement nowadays for companies like ours. Customers want to make sure, or have to make sure to be compliant themselves, that their providers are compliant with security. And ISO 27001, together with PCI, helps us to prove that we are compliant and that we're doing a good job in security. So this whole framework, ISO 27001, is really all based on risk management. That's actually what we do in security. It's managing risk, and the way this works is that we have reviews all the time on our risk, and we have them in a big risk register. We keep track of all the risks that we see and where we are with them, and we aggregate them and we put them into risk maps. I will show you an example of such a risk map also in a minute. And we create plans. We create mitigation plans out of this exercise, and then they end up in one of our programs, like the SHIELD program I mentioned earlier, to keep track of progress in fixing those security issues. Now, risk assessment is really one of the most important things in security. When you start learning about security management, one of the first things you learn is that whenever you don't really know what to do, or what's the next step, do a risk assessment. Look at your risk, try and understand what your risks really are and what you can do about them. So I want to show you very quickly how we do that, just the methodology. So the first thing you have to do, of course, is you have to identify your critical assets. You have to know what you want to protect before you start any protection, mechanisms or start implementing technology. You really need to know what you need to protect. And for us, we have something called asset criticality scales that help us and the business people to identify those critical assets. Next, you have to identify threats to your assets. And for that, we use threat catalogs. We have one threat catalog from the BSI, which is a German governmental organization to help companies and organizations and the government with cybersecurity. So they have a really good threat catalog, and another one that we look at and we use is the one from NIST. Very interesting, by the way. If you've never seen a threat catalog, maybe look at the one from NIST to start with. Then we identify existing controls to mitigate those threats. So we look at what we already have in the company. Is there anything to help mitigate this, or is there something that we're missing that we need to add? And then we look at potential vulnerabilities that we have. So these are the things that we haven't covered with controls. Any vulnerabilities that could be exploited. And vulnerabilities cannot be vulnerable, not only vulnerabilities in code, it can also be missing physical security, for example, missing doors or missing cameras, or not having the right people with the right skills in place. There's plenty of ways to find vulnerabilities and then implement a control for them. And of course, we identify consequences. This is the business impact, something that would happen if this threat would materialize. And for that we also have scales. I'll talk about that in a minute. And we look at the risk scenario likelihood. How likely is it that something like this would happen to us? And then finally, you select a risk treatment option. So you've identified a risk and you know that you need to do something about it. So now you have 4 different options. And these options are described in the ISO framework. Again, this is where the framework comes in really handy. There's a standard called ISO 27005, and that standard deals with risk management. So out of that standard, we have these 4 different ways you can treat a risk. Now, the first one is that you can say, I'm fine with this risk. I can accept it. And that's called risk retention. So basically what you do is you look at your business value, you look at your risk, and let's say the business value is really high and your risk is rather low. So you can say, okay, fine, I can live with this risk. Even if something happens, I can compensate for it. It's okay. It will not hurt me that much. That would be option 1, retain the risk. Now the second is risk avoidance, and that is the total opposite of risk retention. That means I cannot accept this risk. I cannot live with it. I cannot change it. So I have to avoid this risk, which could mean, for example, that you don't go to the market with a product because it's not safe enough, or you withdraw a product from the market because it's not safe anymore because of change of technology, for example. So that would be risk avoidance. Then you have the risk modification, which is what we usually try and do. We find ways to deal with the risk and to mitigate it. And finally, you have risk sharing, and that basically means that you work with a third party. You hand over your risk to a third party, which is usually an insurance. Now that might work for some of the risks. There are cybersecurity policies in place, but of course, again, you have to look at your business. You have to see how much is that insurance going to cost me? Is that worth paying someone to take this risk from me? And in most cases, the answer is no. So that's the 4 options that you have to choose from. And now I want to come back to the risk map. So I mentioned already that cybersecurity is really all about risk management. And that means we need to understand our risk, first of all. We need to really understand where our risks are. And we need to take appropriate actions to, work with this risk, to control it and to mitigate the risks that we have. So I would like to show you a really important tool we use to do this, and that is a risk map. Now this is a schematic. This is, this can look a little different in other places, but it doesn't really matter. The principle is what's important here. So I mentioned earlier that we review our risk, on a regular schedule. We go through them one by one, and of course I cannot share with you what our risks are. That would be too much information for this event here. But and just to give you an example, one of the risks would be a system outage due to a denial of service attack. You can imagine that easily. So the review works like this. First, we look at the likelihood of this risk to materialize for us in our company. And we have a scale for that. We have a scale that ranges from very low, means it's almost impossible that this is ever going to happen to us, to very high or certain on the other hand, which means it is just a matter of time until this may happen to us, or maybe it has actually happened in the recent past. Then it would also end up in that category. Now, let's say for this exercise we have identified that our risk here is in the category high. So there is a pretty high likelihood that this might happen to us. Next, we look at the business impact. Now, that means we look at anything that could happen if this risk materializes in our company. And that would be things like, loss of customers, loss of revenue, loss of reputation, and any associated customer losses, for example, lawsuits, fines. Think about GDPR and the massive fines that companies have to pay for data breaches. So all of that goes into the business impact, and here we have a very simple scale from very low to very high. But in reality, there's a little more science behind this, and there are actually some number scales behind this in terms of losses for the company. And then we put our risk somewhere on that scale. And let's say in this case, we said the business impact would be high. So that puts our risks squarely into the red area. And the red and the purple area here, that is our high risk. This is where we really need to focus our attention and our resources. And that is what a risk map and this whole exercise is really used for. First of all, to understand which of our risks are the most dangerous ones. And secondly, to help us manage our resources and put our money, our people, our skills on the right projects to mitigate the highest risks. So we build projects to make sure, or new processes, for example, to make sure that we reduce the likelihood and the business impact of those high risks. And eventually, of course, we would like to push everything down into the yellow or the green area, but that is something that takes time. And you have to keep track of it. And this is why such a tool is so useful. You can also use this to visualize not only where your risks currently are, but you can also put targets in there, and then you can use that to visualize your status if you go to your executive committee or to a board meeting to show them where the risks are, where they're supposed to be, and what our status is now. Really, really good tool to visualize this. Now, I've mentioned the SHIELD program earlier, and the SHIELD program is one of 3 large programs that we have to manage all these projects related to cybersecurity. In SHIELD, we have projects that are coming from the risk management side, so risk assessments that we have done where we have identified high risks that need to be addressed. Projects are created and they are monitored in the SHIELD program. We also have projects that come out of the maturity assessments. Remember when we talked about the 3 drivers, and in the internal drivers we also had our maturity. So any gaps that we find in maturity assessments, if they are larger gaps, we need to address them, and that will be done also via a project that is monitored in SHIELD. And then we have PCI and GDPR, both of which are in the compliance/regulatory corner. And here we have projects that come out of audit results, audit gaps, that where we have identified that we need to do something to improve. So those projects are monitored in those programs. And now we come to the SOC. I mentioned this a couple of times already, how important these guys are. When we talked about this assume compromise and so on. So we said we need to improve our detection capabilities, and we have built this SOC now, a very, very large group of people now that works around the globe 24/7 on a follow the sun operational model to detect things that shouldn't be there. So the way this works is that, first of all, they monitor all our infrastructure, all the servers, all the databases, all the network components, all the PCs, everything. All of these systems send logs, log files full of events, and we filter the events that are important for us to be able to detect things that shouldn't be there, events and alerts, and they run through something that is called a SIEM, the Security Incident and Event Management System. And this system looks at this massive amount of events, and it looks for certain anomalies and patterns, and when it finds something out of the norm, it will raise an alert. Basically, it says, hey guys, I need a SOC analyst over here, a human, to look at this and figure out what's going on. So that's the monitoring part and the detection part. And so when this happens, a SOC analyst looks at it. If they find that this event or this thing that the CM has told them about is actually a security incident, they will immediately start the response. They will start the security incident response process. They will trigger the right people, and they will help the company to, first of all, contain the incident, make sure it doesn't spread any further, and then to fix it. And that is, in a nutshell, what the SOC does. An extremely important part of our security. Now we'll come to the last part, and this is about how we deal with the human element. You know that this is my personal responsibility, so I wanted to talk about it, of course. And maybe it's something that you don't hear too much about, because usually you're probably more focused on technology. So why is this important? Why is awareness such an important topic? It's because we have different attack vectors. You know, on the one side, on the right side here on this picture, you have the pure technical attack vectors, which is, putting malware on a system, hacking, all these things. But then on the other side, you have the human vectors, people. And the fact is, the bad guys use people to get to machines. They use people, they use phishing attacks, they use social engineering attacks and other techniques and tactics to get to people, to get people to do something that will help them to get onto the machines. There are many studies about this, how often this is used. And so they range from somewhere between, 50-50 like here to other studies that suggest that more than 70% of attacks, successful attacks, need human interaction. Recently I read a study that even suggested up to 90%. But honestly, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter how much it is. The fact remains that people are used to attack systems. And that's why we need to make them aware. Because there is no technology available today that gives you a 100% protection from anything, from any of those attacks. There is still a piece left over that these guys, the hackers, can use, and they keep looking for new loopholes and new ways of attacking people. So it remains an important task. So what do we actually do in security awareness? What we really want to do is we want to change the behavior of our people. And the target is to make security become second nature. That's the long-term target. People should not even think anymore when they get an email. They should, just make it a habit, a second nature to check the URLs of a link, for example, to look at it. Does this look suspicious? Or, check a lot of things before they open an attachment and so on. That should become like breathing, normal second nature. Well, what is behavior? When you look at what behavior actually is, it's made up of two things. One is the attitude that people have, and the other is the motivation. And when you look at attitude is made up of knowledge and emotion. And what we need to address to have successful awareness, to have a successful change of behavior, we need to address all three. We need to address the knowledge, the motivation, and the emotion. And that means on the knowledge side, of course, we need to, we need to explain security activities. We need to explain our policies, how things work, what are the rules, etc. That is pure knowledge. And that is what most companies cover in their training programs, but knowledge alone is not enough. You need to emotionalize it. People remember things when they connect them with an emotion. And in our case, this also means that we want to convey a positive attitude towards security. You know, I can tell you that when we started years ago, there was a lot of negativity around security. You know, security guys were the Mr. No people, the ones that always said no to everything, and that was it. So over time, we have changed this attitude. We now have people having a lot more positive attitude towards security, because they understand why it's important, and they have a motivation to help us. And this is the third important pillar. You need to ask people for understanding, and to understand the threats that we are under, and to understand why we have to do things and why we have to behave in a certain way, and really understand the consequences of bad behavior, etc. And the best way to do that is to show them, demonstrate to them potential threats, for example, in simulated attacks and things like that. So this is a little bit about the psychology, and we have built a huge program to cover all of this, to give people the knowledge, the motivation, and combine all of that with an emotional approach. And what you see here in the top right is our what is it called in English? Don't remember now. It's our helper, our ambassador for security. It's the Phantom. And I will show you a little bit more about that in a minute. So in our program, we basically cover 3 distinct phases in security awareness. And the first one is what we call the shake-up phase. This is more or less for people who don't really know or care about security. We need to shake them a little bit to wake them up. And one thing we do is what we call phantom attacks. So those are simulated attacks. That could be phishing mails, that could be someone doing things in the office, or it could be simulated social engineering attacks via phone, asking people for their password and things like that. We do hacking demonstrations. We do security days, with people on site to show them how hacking actually works. And it's a real eye-opener for people when they see how easy it is to get hacked and what the hackers can do to your machine and to you if you are not careful. So very, very good tool to open up the mind of people. We do classroom trainings. Well, not this year. The last classroom training I did was in January. Now we have moved everything to online sessions, live online trainings, webinars, and we do special manager sessions and induction sessions as wake-up calls for those specific groups of people. Then, of course, we need to impart knowledge. We need to make sure that people know our policies and the guidelines and the tools to use for behaving in a secure manner. So we have a e-learning that people have to do every year. We have what we call Fit for Cybersecurity training, and we have a security at home training, which is where we tell people how to behave at home, how to protect themselves and their families. And of course, people are interested in that. We get a lot of responses when we offer this training, and it's good because once people understand how to protect themselves and their families, of course, they also understand that the same thing applies to their work. We do special trainings for managers to make them aware of their specific role in security. We have trainings for our system security people. Of course, a system administrator needs a whole different type of training than, let's say, an accountant in finance. And we have special trainings for developers and so on, for personal assistants and so on. For different roles in the company, different kinds of trainings, all tweaked for their particular life experience. And then we have sustainability, and this is also very important because people tend to forget very, very quickly. If you don't get a reminder or a little nudge every once in a while, then you tend to forget very quickly, and people go back to their old easy behavior. So we try and do that with, for example, monthly phishing attacks, with other types of phantom attacks, as I mentioned earlier. Again, things that we do on site to get people engaged, and live webinars. And we do continuous communications on all the channels that we have available. That means our intranet. We do use email once in a while, but not too much, because people just get too many emails. So email is not really a good channel for awareness. We used to do things in the office too, with posters or TV screens in coffee rooms, etc. Right now, that's a little less because people are not really in the office. And we use what's called supraliminal messaging. So we have our phantom, and people know it, and we use that on on posters, on things on the desk, so that people always have this little reminder without thinking about it. They keep seeing the phantom everywhere. They don't really think about it, but it's something that also keeps reminding them about security. And the phantom was something we've developed a couple of years ago. This was the initial stage of it, very bland, just this little shape with eyes. And it's amazing what you can do with such a shape, just with eyes. It's an incredible tool for marketing. And that phantom now has evolved over the last couple of years into various shapes and forms that we use all over the company for all kinds of communications about Amadeus. And I can tell you the people really love this phantom. They can relate to it. They find it cute, nice, so it's a really great ambassador for us, and it helps us to have a little emotional I can't find the right word right now, helps us to convey some emotion about security. So we use it here in banners, we use it on the intranet, and in various advertisements we do, etc. We use it on printed materials. We have, for example, quick guides that people can take and put on their desk to help them. Of course, we have all of that online too. We have the e-learning I mentioned earlier, and the phantom basically guides people through the e-learning. And we have simulated phishing attacks, and whenever people make a mistake, fall into our trap, then they will get a message like this one here with the phantom telling them, oops, you fell into our trap. This is what you should have done instead. And this is one of my favorites. Unfortunately, it's something we cannot do right now, because this is what we call a security arena, which is something we do on site, and we play games with people. So it's actually like 5 different stations with like board games. We have a phishing game, a password cracking game, and so on. And there is nothing better to engage people and to let them really think about security and the way they behave than doing this, where the people can actually touch something and do something together. It's a tremendously great thing to train people, but unfortunately right now we can't do it. And then finally we have the merchandise. This is what I mentioned before with the supraliminal messaging. That is, some of these things that are always around on the desk, in the offices. So people like them. They like it when we give them, for example, a camera cover for free, or a nice cup, or a mouse pad, and they really like it, and they use it, which is great because it helps us to spread our message. And oh, I'm too far. I wanted to show you one more thing before we close the session, and that is a little video that we have produced a while ago to show our colleagues our security objectives, and that is a very dry topic. So we try to make it more interesting and more fun, and this is how it works. Just watch that video, and then I'll be back for finals. And
the information security risk to our business is very real and significant. And everyone at Amadeus has a role to play in keeping us secure. So we have developed 7 Amadeus security objectives. Each objective sets out a different way for us to strengthen our information security. Hello Phantom, did you get all of that? Okay, why don't we take a look at them now and see what part you have to play. To start with, we all need to take a risk-based approach. That means each of us needs to learn how to detect potential risks. Oh, well spotted, Phantom. And once we've identified them, we need to make the right decisions to mitigate them. Monitoring and compliance are crucial tools to help safeguard our business. So we've launched a few straightforward procedures for each of us to follow. They're a guide for all of us because we all have a responsibility to act carefully with our information security. And through regular monitoring, we'll ensure we're staying on track. We rely on a range of suppliers and third parties. So it's critical they understand how important information security is to us. The value of our company is based on our know-how and the trust of our customers. We must be sure their data is in good hands. Therefore, we all need to check if our partners are aligned. So we'll be on hand to assist them in following our guidelines and upholding our high standards. Security and privacy need to be embedded into everything we do, no matter what part of the business or function we work in. That's from the start of any process, right the way through to the completion. It's part of our DNA. We are responsible for our data at all times and in all places, no matter where they are stored or processed. This applies in particular to Amadeus cloud services. They are carefully designed and maintained to ensure the highest possible level of security. We need to be resilient. We have to keep looking ahead because the risk to our business is constantly evolving. Our security is an ongoing commitment. It's never done and it's never perfect. We need to be able to identify new threats, develop better defenses and implement more effective responses. But at the center of all of this is you, because our people are our best defense. Information security relies on everyone at Amadeus doing the right thing and protecting our assets. But you're not on your own. We are here to provide you with the knowledge, competencies and authority to make this happen. We've even got the Phantom on hand. By following these objectives, we can combat the threat. So get on board and together we'll keep our information secure and Amadeus and all our customers protected. Information security. It's up to all of us.
all right, that was our little video. I hope you enjoyed that, and I also hope that you enjoyed my presentation today. Hope that maybe you learned a couple of things and you have maybe a different view on security and what it entails. Thank you very much for watching. All the best for your future studies, and most importantly, stay healthy and take care. Bye-bye.